The war between Russia and Ukraine is one such news that almost the entire world is keeping up with. While some assume that Russia is retrieving, while others believe that Russia is sensing defeat. But you might be surprised to know how bad things are for the Russian soldiers. And today, we are going to share it all with you. In this episode, we are going to discuss the exact current state of Russian soldiers. So without any further ado, let's get started. They feel they are being neglected and forgotten by their own people. From the numerous phone calls, letters, and text messages that the Russian soldiers have sent to their relatives and friends, one can easily sense a feeling of betrayal and frustration. They believe that the whole system is rotten and they are facing the grind of it. A call from a Russian soldier to his mother quoting, "We have been bombed by our own plane." Yeah, that's normal in there, decoding. Hence, one can easily feel that the wishes and readiness of Russian soldiers are ignored, and they are left to die, unfortunately, without any support from the system or from their own people. This has made them catch up with stress and made their life miserable. They are not even having access to basic equipment. For a Russian soldier, having basic equipment like a tent or a barracks is no less than luxury. As many young soldiers are left to sleep in the open in shivering cold, which is resulting in their deteriorating health. If this does not sound bizarre enough, then the next thing might surely run chills down your spine. The soldiers in Russia are advised to use tampons for bullet wounds, as it starts to expand and pushes into the wound. And the reason given to them is the skyrocketing price of armor that the Russian government cannot afford for all of them. Although the Russian soldiers were promised good money if they were at the front, but now the circumstances are so bad that instead of sending money to their children and wives, the Russian soldiers are instead forced to ask money from home so they can buy food and necessary survival gear. Many of the Russian soldiers are there in the front without even having basic training. As weird and disturbing as it may sound, but the fact that most of the Russian soldiers are at the war front without even proper training. Many of the Russian troops were told that there would be no training before they would join combat. This, in a way, puts most of them in a vulnerable zone where they have to face attack with the most advanced ammunition, and therefore, a lack of training puts them in a situation of do or die, which increases their misery manifold. Limited contact with their friends and relatives. A soldier is a person who has left his family for a cause, and contacting his family once in a while is the perfect emotional boost that keeps a soldier working no matter how hard the situation is. But for an army that is feared across the globe, the chances of contact with family are rare, and not everyone is lucky here. So mostly, the things are another way around. The family members are the ones to initiate contact, and this is too difficult. The feeling of loneliness increases the sorrow of these soldiers, as they don't have any hope of reconnecting with their family members, which is indeed a worse phase of everyone's life. The Russian soldiers are facing the challenges of intelligent collections, and the problem has become amplified. The rotten system and the poor coordination among the Russian soldiers have caused havoc on the front line, and have made the already miserable Russian troops more vulnerable. This is fully evident after the fast and continuous success of the Kharkiv offensive. The way the Ukrainian troops are advancing, it seems the Russian troops are facing an adverse issue of collecting intelligence, which has led to the recent withdrawal of Russia. In addition to this, the Russian soldiers are also facing problems of mistrust, fear, control, and failure of command, which in many ways have led to the debate of an otherwise much efficient Russian army. And the adverse effect of these loopholes are faced by the ordinary Russian soldiers who are on the front line, fighting with negligible intelligence. Preaching and practicing are two different things. Before any nation commences its war, it has a full set of planning, systems, and strategy that is supposedly meant to guide the military of the nation on how to conduct the war. But this blueprint of war that the Russian military thought to execute has not become practically effective in Ukraine. And it seems that the Russia is planning this war as it was in the Soviet era, which isn't quite applicable today. And the wrath of this strategy is faced by the Russian troops, who have become anxious and concerned for their future. This has indeed made the lives of these soldiers gloomy, and in these circumstances, one can only wish for the good of the world. A constant hatred from the world, Russia was the one to initiate the war, and as such, Ukraine and the Ukrainian forces became the ones who were there to defend their country, apparently against a much bigger and powerful Russia. This automatically made the image of Ukraine and the Ukrainian forces a good one, plus the disturbing videos of destruction and agony the world saw in Ukraine made the people to believe that Russia is an evil country that wants to disturb world peace. This directly meant that the Russian troops were bad, hence the Russian army drew a lot of flack from the internet users all around the world, and much worse were said against them, and this online hate still continues. This has resulted in lowering the morale of the Russian troops, and they are starting to feel bad about themselves. This again is the worst experience one has to face in his lifetime. They are feeling isolated. While the world leaders stood by the side of Ukraine during the UN sessions that were called for the addressal of this war, Russia managed to gather very few supporters and thus remained more or less isolated. Plus, the autocratic regime of the Russian generals is really bad at information, and thus they misunderstood or underestimated the Ukrainian army, and in a way overestimated their own strength, which ultimately led to Russia losing their hold and ultimately giving less artillery to their troops, which has led to the loss of precious lives. A hierarchy system that is adding fuel to the mutiny. Generally, the low-ranking commanders are not allowed to make their own decisions and are left in the dark about what's happening. They are often disgraced and not treated as equals. Even a vast number of these low-ranking soldiers knew they were invading Ukraine when they saw themselves crossing the Welcome to Ukraine signboard, but this one can understand what is the level of hierarchy in the Russian military. The lack of information also is an indication of the corruption in the Russian military, and many of the low-lying Russian troops are now in the opinion that many of the high-ranking officials went to make career in the army just to steal and not to fight, and when they found they had to literally fight in the battlefield, they were not ready for it. And hence, they made the low-ranking officials face the miseries of the war and climates of bad times, which has led to the disparity among Russian soldiers, and each one among them is thinking for their own good. Willingness to fight the war. Even before war, Russia was a big and powerful country and enjoyed much of the dominion over most of the countries of the world. So one can easily say that entering into a war with Ukraine was not a wise and fruitful decision on the Russian part. But once the war was declared, it was a matter of the dignity and pride of their homeland for most of the Ukrainians, so they were ready to give it their all for their homeland. But for the Russian troops, circumstances were completely different. The higher army men wanted gains, and the low-ranking troops couldn't exactly unfold the turn of events, and they were likely dragged into the war. Hence, the determination of the Russians and the will to fight was completely lacking, and the worst part was that they completely underestimated the willingness of Ukrainians to fight. Smaller and more willingful armies often have proved fatal for big armies, and this is exactly what is happening in Ukraine. This was all for today's episode about how events are unfolding in the war-torn Ukraine, and what are the exact effects it has on the Russian soldiers, and what is the current state. But we personally believe war has no solution and the world needs more love and peace. Fewer wars and bloodshed, because wars ultimately lead to the decline of humanity. That's a wrap up for today. If you liked our episode, do like, comment and share, and don't forget to subscribe. Also activate the bell icon so you never miss an update and always get notified when a new video comes out. Till then, take care of yourself, and remember, the darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do so.